personal prayers, giving you a chance to offer those personal prayers is something that we are that I invite you to consider. One of the last things that I'll do is also invite you to consider using different video clips to either prepare before the Seder or possibly during the Seder. So that's where I love the movie The Prince of Egypt. It gets to so many of the core themes of Passover. I also love an interview with Jonathan Safran Foer with Stephen Colbert a number of years ago, where Safran Foer comes up with the New American Haggadah, and Colbert asks him, I mean, every part of this interview is just hilarious, but he essentially says, wait a minute, all these Jews write a new edition of the Haggadah. Does that mean every Jew thinks they could tell the story better than Moses himself? And Safran Foer very eloquently says, well, it's about making it relevant in each and every generation. And I just want to share the end of this because I think it's such a poignant piece. The Passover story is the least original story. It's very familiar. It's been told by more than 100 generations of Jews. It is one of the most widely recognized stories across cultures. It's been borrowed by more social justice movements than any other stories. The Haggadah compels us to experience its retelling, to be characters inside the story rather than just sit back and receive it. To do that, you have to create a document that is really engaging, that is confrontational, and that is provocative. So I know it's our goal tonight to be offering you sources that are helpful, that are relevant, that are provocative, that are meant to inspire you and your family. And we want you to know that wherever you are, if you are by yourself, if you're with your immediate family, if you're Zooming with family, we want you to know that we want to be here with you. We want to support you. We want to provide you with resources. No question about Passover is too stupid. And we can't wait to continue learning with you and celebrating with you and yours. And with that, I will pass it on to Rabbi Siegel.
Okay. All right. Good evening, everybody. Yasher Koach to Rabbi Russo. It's a pleasure to greet you and to wish you a very happy Pesach. I can't see everybody the way that this is set up, but I wish I could get a show of hands to know how many people were going to be on a Zoom video this year with family members. Hard to know. I'm going to say that there's a pretty good percentage. So I want to start by talking about how you plan a Seder, and I'm going to spend a few minutes just thinking about doing one on Zoom. If you are going to be on Zoom and you're leading the Seder, let me go through a couple of things. First of all, as tempting as it is, don't look at yourself in one of the frames. Just look at everyone, because I think that eye contact in a Zoom video makes all the difference in the world. You should go through the Seder carefully beforehand. And one of the things to keep in mind is that you need to time out the Seder. In other words, you need to think about your audience and about how long they're going to be able to engage. And engaging on a Zoom video may be more trying than just being there in person. So I would suggest that no more than 45 minutes to an hour before you eat. I think that it is a really nice opportunity to give people parts. You can give them reading parts. If you make use of the Haggadot that Rabbi Russo mentioned, especially the Hartman Haggadot, they make it pretty easy to give people parts in advance to read, etc. Now on Thursday night, Max Handelman is going to be talking about Sidarim and young people. But one thing that you can do that's pretty easy is to have children. If you have children in a particular household and you're doing a Zoom video, they can act out. They can put on a play of some scene in the Haggadah or in the story of Yetziat Mitzrayim. You may want to ask people to bring a question this year. You know, we have 4 questions. What's the 5th question? question. And one of the things that I want to suggest to you is that the coronavirus issues are very much on our minds. And as these days go forward here in Chicago, likely to even be more intensified. And so I'm preparing a list of meditations on the Haggadah, which will be up on the website later in the week, where I'm going to go through almost every aspect of the Haggadah and give certain meditations that relate to these times. Not because you should make the entire Seder about the coronavirus, because I think that would be an error, but certainly needs to be mentioned. And especially because we're talking about plagues and things like that, I think some thought in advance as to how you're going to present it and in what context could be, and I think needs to be well considered. So if you're going to prepare a discussion question, one might be about how would you understand the Rasha? How would you understand the wicked child this year? On the one hand, you could argue that the wicked child is the one who actually was separating himself. So this is the child who is already practicing social distancing. But if you look more deeply, what you'll see is that the Rasha is not simply separating for the betterment of the community. The Rasha is separating because the only person that the Rasha is interested in is him or herself. And if you kind of contextualize that within the coronavirus universe, how do we protect each other? How do we think along communal lines? And if that's true, then what makes the Chacham, and what does one do with all of the facts and figures, and how does one apply them? Who would you make the Chacham this year? Who would you make the Rasha? How would you understand that? And as long as we're having this conversation, who would be the hero of our story this year? Would it be the nurses? Would it be the EMT? Would it be the emergency people? How would you, and I think it could make for an interesting conversation about how we understand heroes in our tradition, being that Moses' name doesn't even come into the Haggadah. If you want to talk about plagues, then I would suggest that you think about it and make a distinction between what the Torah is talking about in terms of plagues and how to understand it in our own day. It's clear that the Torah is understanding God as being the hand behind the plagues, and that they are being offered both as a punishment and as an instruction. But in the case of the coronavirus, are the plagues coming at our own hand? How do we understand that? Might be a question worthy of conversation. And what role then does God play in our world? Finally, two more really quickly is if you wanted to talk about Dayenu, a question, is it a question or a statement? In other words, when we say that, we would have been satisfied if God would have taken us out of Egypt and not given us the Torah, do we say Dayenu? Yes, it's a matter of faith that we have come to this point, and we are satisfied and grateful for whatever God gives us. Or are we saying Dayenu? Is this a question? Would it have been enough for us? And what is enough for us? What do we have to be grateful for this year? What are the blessings that continue to surround us even in this moment? And you might ask people in your Seder to write down a blessing that they have or they've witnessed or they've received during this challenging time. Write it down and perhaps, or read it during the course of the Seder, or maybe as part of Dayenu. One game that we play at home is Forehead Detective. And what we do in our house is, we fill out cards and people put them, we have a little crown and we have a clothespin, and you put the 3x5 card, and you could be one of the plagues, or you could be one of the characters. And of course, everyone around the table can read the card, but you as the participant might not know, you wouldn't know what the card says. And so you have to ask questions, you have to guess who you are. It could be a lot of fun to do on a Zoom video as well. If you ask one person to close their eyes and you hold up a card where everybody can see, and then they can ask questions, it makes the Seder go a little bit, it makes the Seder fun. And a Seder should be fun, and it should be filled with singing and learning. So if we can bring up the screen with the Seder order, I would really appreciate that. Can we do that? Okay. Is it up? Maybe is it up? I'm trying to figure this out.
David is going to get it up. He's trying to get it up right now.
Okay. So while David's doing that, let me continue on. We're going to make a distinction between what is required from the Torah's perspective and what is in the Haggadah. And I think that it's important to look at the order of the Seder and to give it consideration. So you'll see in the sheet that I prepared that the things that are halachically required are going to be in bolder print. But and that the Seder that we use, I just want to mention, is a rabbinic invention, which is quite lovely, based upon, as David said a few minutes ago, on a Greco-Roman rhetorical meal. Now, a rhetorical meal had 3 cups of wine. Our Seder has 4 cups of wine, which speak to 4 different elements of deliverance that appear early on in the Exodus narrative.
And Michael, it's up on the screen now.
Okay, why can't I see it? Oh, there it is. Okay, thank you. So you can see the dark and darker print. Those are things that, from the tradition's point of view, are required. Kadesh is the opportunity to acknowledge time. And if you're leading a Seder for the first time, what I want to acknowledge is that almost all of this should be and can be conducted in English. The Borei Pri Hagafen would be best to say in Hebrew, but we are acknowledging that we can take time and create a separation in time, that we can kind of take a break, if you will, from what's going on outside of our doors, outside of our windows, and we can engage in the most ancient of stories and our defining story. And we can raise ourselves up, and that is really the inner meaning of the word kadosh. It's to separate and to elevate. We are separating and elevating time. Now, the orchatz, the first orchatz, is symbolic. It's a preparation to eat the karpas. And really, it's designed, and we say it without a bracha. And it's really designed to begin to have children asking questions. And so if you'd like to do it, you may, and if not, you can forego that. I do want to mention, by the way, that Chazan Mizrahi and I are going to be creating a video. We're gonna record an abbreviated Seder, but one that you can show during the course of the holiday if you would like, and join in the Passover festivities with us. We're going to record it on Wednesday, but the Chazan will be singing. I'll do some commentaries as we go along. So if you don't feel comfortable leading the Seder, or you're going to be alone and that doesn't feel comfortable to you, you might decide you want to, depending on how you understand that halachically, you may want to join in. As far as the karpas goes, and dipping greens into salt water, what I want to suggest is that the vegetables represent springtime. The salt water, obviously, the tears of the people of Israel. And I think that this is and I think that there's something to be said for the fact that we control the springtime. We control and spring is always filled with hope. And even though this is a terrifying time, the fact is that as we dip them in the salt water, it's an opportunity for us to talk about what we are hopeful about. The Yachatz and the Magid, you can, Yachatz is, normally we have 3 matzot. We have 2 on Shabbat. On Pesach, we have 3, because the third one is going to be broken and half will be used for the Afikomen. And what I want to underscore here is in normal years, we talk about that this is the bread of poverty. And that when we break it, we are thinking about how people respond to those in need and how we have to, and that a person who doesn't know where their next meal is going to come from will break a matzah in half and take and put half of it away because at least they know they'll have something to eat later on. They don't take even the poorest of bread for granted. And so this year, you may want to think about the notion of what is it, how do we repair when we feel broken? How do we heal at a time when we are broken? And in a sense, what we need to be searching for is the elements that will make us whole again. The story, of course, is the essence, but we ask questions. And so the Manishtana is, of course, the 4 questions. And as I suggested earlier, you may want to use this as an opportunity to add some questions of your own. I do want to acknowledge that the account of the Seder in B'nai Brak, I think, has special resonance for us this evening because they're hiding. This is shelter in place. These 4 rabbis are living during the Bar Kokhba revolution, and they only stopped telling the story at the time of the Shema. We are not the first Jews that have had shelter in place, and it may be powerful to spend a few minutes thinking about that. I think that looking at the pictures that Rabbi Russo noted can be a really wonderful way, and the conversation we might have about the 4 children. I would suggest being very careful with the Magid section, in the section that begins Aramido Vedavi. And I would suggest to you that reading this one section, the quotation that was recited by every Jew, should cover it, and I would skip from there to the 10 plagues. One thing that you might want to look for in your Haggadah, first of all, 2 things. One is this notion of taking a little bit of the pain out is a very powerful thing, especially in our age, when we are thinking about what is in our hands and what is not in our hands. And if you look at the Haggadah in terms of the 10 plagues, what you'll see are that the rabbis are going to multiply them. They're going to do that by using their hands, by counting to 10 and counting on their hands. And so what is 1 plague to God? And if there are 10 hands, so that it goes to 100, and they multiply them in all kinds of different ways. Well, it does feel like in our day, the plague of the coronavirus is growing by leaps and bounds. What is in our hands? What can we do to comfort others? What can we do with our hands? And how can we reach out in ways that will lessen the pain of the plagues? We talked about Dayenu earlier. A short conversation about Pesach, Matzah, and Maror is more, it can serve as really the Seder in and of itself. I think underscoring B'chol Dor Vador in every generation, I don't think that we've dealt with the kinds of issues we're dealing with, but I think we can expand that conversation. And whether you know to sing Hallel or not, the opportunity to read, to chant at least one of the Psalms is certainly in order. 2nd cup of wine, Motzi Maror. And I'm just going to keep scrolling down because I know that I don't want to take up any more time than I've been given. I think that the only thing else I wanted to say was that opening the door for Elijah this year is a very powerful issue. And what does it mean to be redeemed? What does it mean to celebrate redemption? What I want to suggest to you is that the very first shelter in place in Jewish history was the first Seder, the first night of Passover for the Jewish people. They were sequestered in their homes, and it was terrifying. It was a terrifying moment, and yet they lived with the confidence that redemption would yet come. And I think that it's important for us to underscore the idea that they shared a meal, and that the Pesach offering, the goat or lamb that they offered, was if there were not enough people in their home, they shared it. And I think that connection between people is what's going to help us win the redemption. We can live with confidence that the plague that we're living with will come to an end at some point, but at the same time, it's going to take us connecting with each other to get there. I'm going to stop here and turn it over to Rabbi Jacob Gould, and if you have any questions at the end, I'm more than happy to have a conversation about them.
Hi, everybody. It's good seeing you all. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. I wanted to take some time to address what are some of the halachic issues for Pesach during the time of coronavirus in particular. So I put together a list of what I think are the questions I've heard from you about the things that have really been bothersome to us or keeping us thinking about how do I maybe do things differently this year given the circumstances. All of the sources that I'm going to talk about and those that Rabbi Siegel discussed, those that Rabbi Russo discussed are in the PDF that's been put in the chat. They'll also be on the website. So everything that I'm going to talk about, you have the links to. But here are the things that I imagine might be top of mind for you. So one question is, Seder this year is going to be lonely. Is it okay to use a different kind of technology than I've used in the past? For some folks, this doesn't present a conflict. Some of us are already used to using Zoom or other kinds of technology at all times, but for some of us, this really feels like something new in a way that we haven't stretched before, and this might be the first year we're considering it. So I want to share with you what's been said. The first thing you should know is that everything I'm sharing comes from the Committee of Jewish Laws and Standards. The CJLS is the conservative movement's body of 25 rabbis that meets with some level of regularity to make decisions on behalf of our movement and to inform people who are the Mara Da'atra, the rulers for our community, which is to say Rabbi Siegel in our case. All of these resources are online. The CJLS has worked in overtime over the last week or so to provide very much tailored answers to how we can address Pesach in particular in a time of coronavirus. So they've said this. The bottom line is that permission has been granted officially by the conservative movement to use technology in order to bring other people into your Seder. And I want to take a step back and say that's the case not only from the conservative movement, but actually there's a very moving piece that's been written by 15 different Sephardi Orthodox rabbis in Israel who have granted permission for people to be using Zoom technology and other technologies to bring people into their Seder. They do so on a couple of points. One thing is they say that there are ways, and the CJLS agrees with this, that we can use technology, but I would challenge us to think about how can you use your technology differently than you would on a regular Monday afternoon? What can you do differently to still distinguish the way that you're using that technology to bring others into your Seder that night? So for example, some guidelines from the CJLS are, they suggest, can you set up your device in advance so that it's already on? Can you set it up so you don't need to type into it, but have a link that's already open? Could you decide to use video but not use chat, right? So that we're refraining from writing while still accessing the video. Could we think about using a virtual assistant like Siri or Alexa even to open up the app at the time that you're going to use it rather than manipulating the device yourself. Each of those are different suggestions that the CJLS makes and that various rabbis agree with as ways to say, I'm using technology in this way on this Pesach for this year for very particular reasons. And that doesn't mean that I can't put a fence around it in order to do so more carefully or more thoughtfully, and I might have it another time. Certainly that's what I'm going to do. I've never used video technology on Pesach before. This year I'm going to, because I'm not going to sit in the house by myself without my kids having access to their grandparents, for example. But that doesn't mean I'm going to approach my technology the same way I do on a Monday. I try to set it up as I do if I use technology on Shabbat or Yom Tov in a way that I have the least interaction possible with that technology, and particularly to avoid writing. One of the things that's interesting about the ruling from the Sephardi rabbis who came up with this, which doesn't include the chief rabbi, but it does include the head Sephardi rabbi on Jerusalem's rabbinic court. It includes the head Sephardi rabbis of multiple cities. You'll notice it's Sephardic rabbis, not Ashkenazi rabbis. They tend to be more lenient than Ashkenazi rabbis on the whole. And this group of folks has said that not only is it a leniency because we live in a difficult time, but because people need each other, and they focus on intergenerational connections as an essential piece of the Seder itself. And saying because of that, because Seder is all about intergenerational connection and the necessity of older generations teaching younger generations and younger generations asking their questions of older generations, that at all times actually using this for Seder is great. So that's one question you might have, and I'm happy to talk a little bit more about later. Another question you might have. I have an awful lot of chametz in my house. Given the reality that going to the grocery store is more challenging this year than other years, what do I do? If you, right, you have all that pasta that you stockpiled because you thought you weren't going to be able to get the grocery store. You can get to the grocery store, but you still have all that pasta. Okay, so what are we going to do? The answer is actually quite simple, which is that on Pesach, there are all kinds of workarounds. The most classic workaround is that we sell our chametz so that it's not in our possession during that period of time. Anshe Emet will still be doing this. You can do it online. You can sell your chametz, anything you have, and we can take care of it that way. This is a legal fiction. The things you want with your chametz on Pesach are you don't want to see it and you don't want to own it. So you want to put that chametz somewhere where you physically can't see it, in a cabinet that's closed, or even with a paper in front of it or the like. You want to make sure that it's not technically in your possession, which can be accomplished again simply through that ritual of selling. There are prayers, and I have the links in the PDF that we sent, to a piece called Bitul. Bitul Chametz is the statement that you make the night before Pesach and again the morning of Pesach. What it says is, I give up ownership of everything that I haven't sold, effectively, everything that's in my possession, that I know about and that I don't. So here's what that means. If Jay has some crumbs under his couch, you're right underneath me in my Zoom window, Jay. If you have some crumbs under your couch and you missed them, it's okay. Just say bitul. When you say bitul, you're saying they become as afra da'ara, they become like dust. So it's not chametz anymore, it's dirt. It does mean, Jay, that you cannot reach under your couch after Pesach and eat the cracker. I'm sorry to tell you, because it's now become inedible for all kinds of reasons. But the moment we say that, it's real. These legal fictions exist for a reason. And this year of all years, it gives us permission to be a little more gentle with ourselves, to say we're going to miss something and we can go through these various steps and it's going to be fine. Another thing you might be thinking about during the age of coronavirus is going to the grocery store is complicated. And the grocery store may not have everything that you're used to finding. It may not be easy to get. So how do you handle Pesach this year? Let's start by thinking about Seder foods. Number one, matzah. You are only obligated to eat matzah on the nights of the Seder. The rest of Pesach, you're not supposed to eat chametz. So you do not need a truckload of matzah. You need enough matzah for your family, which is by necessity small right now because it's only you guys in your home, to eat enough matzah on the night of Seder. That's it. So we can take a breath and say, if I don't have a ton of matzah, it's fine. Karpas. Rabbi Russo already mentioned that there's a fun custom of thinking of different things you might use for karpas. Use that leniency this year. If you don't find parsley, no problem. Grab some celery, grab some strawberries, grab some potatoes. Lots of Israelis use actually boiled potatoes for karpas. There are lots of options. We don't need to obsess about whether we found parsley on the time that we ran into the grocery store the one time. The same is true for maror. You can use horseradish, but you don't have to. Maror needs to be something that you can eat raw that will bring a tear to your eye. That's the standard. So that could be ginger, it could be a lemon, it could be mustard greens, it could be a hot pepper. Not that I exactly would want to experience that, but that's the whole point, right? So you have lots of options. Don't worry about whether you find the horseradish in the grocery store. And even, by the way, the egg and the roasted shank bone on the Seder plate are not necessary. If you don't find a shank bone or you don't have time to get one, you can actually use a roasted beet and rice if you're consuming kitniot. It's actually in the Talmud. In the Talmud, they used a roasted beet and rice as their representatives. So you have lots of options here of how you can get those Seder plate items, even if you're limited in your grocery store time. Outside of the grocery store for Seder, it's also true that shopping for Pesach this year is more difficult than ever because the reality is that, again, going to the grocery store is complicated for so many of us. So you're going to find on the links that I sent some leniencies that the CJLS has provided to us. The first thing to know is that there are certain things that do not require a kosher for Pesach certificate if you buy them before Pesach. That's true every year. That includes things like eggs, unflavored tea, kosher wine, plain butter, things like that don't need a hechsher no matter when they're purchased. No matter when they're purchased. Then there are other foods that don't need a hechsher if you buy them before Pesach in a normal year, like milk and plain cheese, certain kinds of meat, non-flavored yogurts, pure honey. Those things, if you buy it before Pesach, you don't need a kosher for Pesach symbol on it. This year, the CJLS has said, you could also buy those things during the week of Pesach themselves, during Chol HaMoed, even without a hechsher, if you're without other options. And here, I would leave it to each of you to determine what that means. Without other options might mean the grocery store is out, or it might mean that you need to be very judicious about how much time that you're spending out. That's a leniency that's being provided. That's a reasonable way that we might still buy some of those pure natural products, even during Pesach, even if we didn't buy it beforehand, even without a hechsher. The exception to that, of course, is going to be matzah, any kind of baked good. That stuff is going to need hechshers, right, no matter what. The final question I thought you might be wondering about is about kitniot. I've gotten this question from a few. So you're probably familiar with the tradition that there are Sephardim who eat kitniot during Pesach and always have. That's things like rice and beans, corn, green beans, different kind of legumes. In 2015, the CJLS ruled that you can have kitniot no matter whether you're Ashkenazi or Sephardi. That was a piece that I have a link to posted. That was written in 2015 as in a permission for those who would walk into it for family reasons, for health reasons, because they're vegetarians and vegans and the like. They've actually gone rather further this year and said that they actively encourage all of us, whether we usually eat kitniot or not, to eat kitniot this year. Because there are shortages of food, there are grocery store issues that are complicated. This isn't the year that we need to be the most stringent. It's the year that we need to make the safest choices possible to get through Pesach in a way that's kosher and that also keeps us safe and sane. Kitniot is not chametz. It's something that Ashkenazim traditionally didn't eat because it was sold adjacent to chametz in the old days. Pure kitniot nowadays is not chametz. It is not an Ashkenazi tradition. Of all things, this might be the year to change with that tradition. Those are some of the questions that I imagined might be percolating for you. But I'm going to pause now and give people an opportunity to ask questions to any of the rabbis about any of the material that's come up or about anything else that's on your mind that we can be of help.
So feel free at this time to either unmute yourself and ask a question, or if you look on the bottom, you can click on the reactions part and wave a hand, and Amy or I will unmute for you.
Where does the roasted beet and rice come from for the shank bone?
So it comes from the Talmud in the section Psachim, and I have the link there, the exact citation. The reason is that those things initially actually represented core items of the meal itself, is what they were actually representative of. So they were sort of taking the place of main dishes.
David, will you unmute? No?
Yeah, I'm going to try and unmute Neil. I see you there, Neil. Let me get you.
Okay.
It's not letting me do it.
Okay, how about that?
Yep.
Okay. Do you have a link to the articles that refer to what the rabbis are doing in Israel and what
Yep,
they're
the link
allowing people to do
yep, the link is right there on the sheet.
on the sheet? On your okay, I'm looking at your sheet.
If you go
Oh,
through
Rabbinical Times of Israel, I see it. Okay,
there's
thank
a
you.
there's a Times of Israel article there that summarizes what that looks like.
Okay, thank you.
Rivka in the chat looked like she asked a question about the boil-a-thon.
Mm.
Dave, sorry, Rivka, go ahead.
Okay, I wasn't sure if you could hear me. Yeah, I was just wondering because every year we normally go to the boil-a-thon and boil all of our stuff. And this year we can't do that, obviously. So if you could, I haven't looked at the PDF, but is there any information on exactly what we can do, how we're going to boil all of our stuff?
Great, I'm so glad you asked. So while you're right, we cannot do the boil-a-thon in person. So Rivka's asking because there are ways to kosher or to make ready for Pesach certain items that you use in your home for the rest of the year, especially for Passover. For some of those items, you can put them into a boiling pot of hot water, but some of those items might be big. So what we do every year at the synagogue is we have a massive pot of boiling water that our staff set up. So first of all, next year, I invite you all to it. It's really great. For this year, while we can't do it in person, on our website, on the Passover page, there are links to videos on how to do the boiling. Chazan Berkey had us do this a few years ago for her JBC students. We're very lucky that we now have all these videos stored up on hand. So feel free to go to that link, the Passover page of the Anshe Emet website. And if you have more specific questions than what's there, you can reach out to any of us rabbis, and we're happy to talk you through how to do any of the koshering, any of those questions that you have. Great question.
Thank you.
And I want to acknowledge that this year, what that might mean is that some people are going to use more plasticware, and that's okay. Right? And like, let's give ourselves permission to say, this is the year that you can use paper plates, if that's what needs to happen, or to use different kinds of implements or plastic stuff and make do. Right? So that's one piece of it. Another thing I do want to add to that question, Rivka, is a question about burning that I meant to say. You might be wondering also if you've come in the past to burn chametz, which is traditionally done the day of Pesach at the shul. We're not going to be able to pull that off in person this year. You can burn, if your tradition is to burn chametz the day of Pesach before the Seder and say the prayer, you could do that on your private barbecue on your balcony. But it's also possible to flush it down the toilet. And actually, there are some people who think that that's preferable. So if you're not burning this year, you can take a little piece of chametz, put it in the toilet, flush, you've officially destroyed it, and you can say your prayer. And that's a perfectly decent workaround.
It is traditional to step outside the bathroom for the bracha, though. I should also mention that, in our tradition, we are to live by these commandments, and we're not really, the intention is not to put ourselves in danger for the commandments. And so it's important for us to kind of minimize the number of times we need to go out to do things. And if you don't have everything you need, this is the year to kind of find the balance really in how we manage our Pesach, because safety has to be our utmost concern. And so again, I just want to say that minimizing the number of times we go out to purchase things is better. And I think that's the mitzvah, is to care for ourselves.
And I think I saw Aura had a question. Aura, go ahead.
I have two questions. One easy to anyone and one to a little more complicated. I think the simple one is if you do it, if you do a Zoom Seder with your grandchildren in New York, how do you get around the Afikoman thing? I assume that we hide it in Chicago someplace and we move the camera. But if they're greedy grandchildren, how do you deal with Afikoman?
That is a great question, and I have to say, I have not actually given that a lot of consideration. But I see a hand up. Is that to answer the Afikoman question?
Yes.
Okay, go ahead.
Well, I will hide the Afikoman and I ask them to tell me where they're looking, and I'll give them hot and cold, and they will eventually get to the location.
Right.
Where I get it.
But what do I, finally, when they find it, how do I, oh, you mean then send it to Amazon or something? How do you reward them?
My parents have very generously already sent us 2 books for our kids. And you could also ask your kids if they have books already on hand. But also to know that it's possible those things might not get there. And it's a chance to be able to talk with the kids about the fact that there might be things that are a little bit different, like something might not arrive on time, like we're planning to. So you can also prepare them for that. But there are ways to, whether it's through local bookstores or larger.
Yeah, of giving them some clues around the apartment in Chicago is a very good idea. Now, the difficult question, how do we translate the issue of the plague? And, you know, obviously we know the role of God in the Haggadah and the plagues, but how do we deal with that? We have babies who died. We have babies who did not have time lachto. הם לא חטאו עדיין.
Well, this is a much longer conversation, but in the Torah itself, the Torah goes to great pains to show that the plagues were a justified punishment for the Egyptian people who all participated in the enslavement of not only in the enslavement of the Jewish people, but in the destruction of the firstborn. It was only Shifra and Puah who raised their voices. So we can criticize God, we can express our abhorrence at the kinds of plagues that were visited upon the Egyptians, but clearly there, the Torah is specifically telling us that these come at the hand of God. The reality is that that is a unique circumstance, and one should be very careful in ascribing every natural event to the hand of God. Now, the creation does come from God, but that doesn't make the creation perfect. It is our role as human beings to partner with God to help perfect the creation. Because if that wasn't true, then we wouldn't be able to practice medicine. We would see everything as a punishment from God, but in fact, it is our responsibility to kind of partner with God and work within the creation to discover cures for all kinds of illnesses, and God willing, soon the coronavirus. So the fact is that we are suffering terribly with a pandemic, but to ascribe that to God, I think would be, theologically, from my perspective, that would be a mistake. But I would go farther, because you might say to me, well, how do you know that? Certainly there are evangelicals and there are some very far right-wing rabbis that would also suggest that God's hand was involved. And here I would say that in the very early stage of rabbinic Judaism, the rabbis themselves outlawed prophecy. None of us are prophets. None of us know the mind of God. What we do believe is that God places the potential in our hands to find the cure and to work to heal others. What God also does in moments like this is remind us of the connection of all human beings and that all of us are ultimately created in the image of God. And beyond that, that God is with all of us and God doesn't leave us. And when we feel the loneliest, when we feel alone, part of our tradition reminds us that God walks with us in the most difficult of times. And we look to God not only to heal us physically, but to heal us spiritually. And so I would be very careful to separate God from the coronavirus, but look to God as a healer and a partner.
Thanks, Rabbi Siegel. I'm wondering if we want to do a lightning round. I want to respect everybody's time. Maybe we can take the 3 last questions right in a row, and then the rabbis can say a couple last things to wrap up. So Barry, why don't we start with you with your question?
Oops. Thank you. Yeah, not a question, but I put a link in the chat to everybody for a virtual Afikoman search that Marlene and I found online today. It's from the World Jewish Service, and it's probably best for kids maybe over 10 and even for the adults at the Seder. But it asks you 3 questions. Each one takes you to a different part of their website. And at the end, if you find the Afikoman, an outside donor will donate $1 to the World Jewish Service. Wow. So, and it's very nice. It does work. I tried it, and I had an outside donor donate $1. For the younger kids, we were kind of brainstorming this, and we thought that whoever's hosting the Seder, we're assuming that people are going to be using laptops for this, but the host can hide the Afikoman as you would normally, and the kids, wherever they are, have to direct the host to different places in his house where they want him to search. So basically, the kids are remote controlling the host as to where to go, and whichever kid directs the host to the correct spot, then has found the Afikoman. The prize, I'll leave it up to you guys to determine.
Barry, thank you so much for sharing that. I'm going to turn to Judy for your question.
Sure.
Judy, did you have a question? I unmuted you so we can hear you if you had a question.
Oh, no, I did not.
Okay, I saw you raise your hand, but okay. We'll take that off. I see, Mark, that you had a question. You should be able to be unmuted.
Hey guys, it's Jonathan sitting here with Mark. Yeah, quick question. I know Rabbi Siegel, I know you'd mentioned that the first Seder was somewhere around the year 35 CE, and with the temple falling in the year 70 CE, I'm just curious if there was like a preparation period of some sort, or where the rabbis sensed that coming and started making this Seder post-temple, or what was that? Maybe just you could speak quickly to like what that evolution looked like as we got to from pre-temple to post-temple to like what that intermediate period was.
I think that it's a great question, and 2 things. One is that while the temple still stood, this Pesach was Hechag. It was the holiday. And that meant that it had the greatest number of people coming to Jerusalem to observe it. It was, the pinnacle of the Shalosh Regalim, the pilgrimage festival. And there Jews gathered in the hills of Jerusalem, and they sacrificed the lamb within, and it was slaughtered on the temple grounds. And then they took the lamb and they roasted it in the fields, which is in the hills of Jerusalem, which is the scene of the Last Supper. And so up until the destruction of the temple, the Jerusalem was the center of observance for Jews. That doesn't mean that Jews, and when Jews told the story, they told it in their own way. Now, it's hard to know what the traditions are. The Manish Tana, the original form of the Manish Tana that appears in the Mishnah, mentions roasting the meat, and why in all that is you boil meat, but now we're roasting it. So we don't use that version, but it's not hard to find the original version, which is it's reflecting the time of the temple. But once the temple is destroyed, the Pesach is re-engineered in a really interesting way. But and you can read about this. But what I want to point out to you is that even though Moses isn't mentioned in the Haggadah, rabbis like Rabbi Tarfon, Rabbi Akiva, all of those rabbis that are being discussed in the Haggadah, right? And that time in Bnei Brak, that is all post Second Temple. It's right around the Bar Kokhba rebellion. They are, and this is this is the genius of that generation, is that they made Pesach portable, and they gave us the foundations for the Haggadah that allowed the Jew to take their story wherever they would go and feel that they were authentically observing the holiday. And so in a remarkable way, the Haggadah becomes one of the factors that makes for the survival of the Jewish people, and also explains why the Haggadah is the most published Jewish book. So on Wednesday night of this week, Steve Derschlag is going to talk about his Haggadah collection. He has more than 10,000 separate editions of the Haggadah. It's remarkable how many editions of the Haggadah and how it tells the story of the Jewish people. So thanks for your question, but I hope that that's just a short and hopefully concise answer.
I appreciate it. Thank you.
So in a moment, Rabbi Siegel, we'd love for you to wrap up the evening. If you have any other questions, please feel free to email us. We have a recording of this that is going to be going on the website. You can find this source sheet on the website. And Rabbi Siegel, why don't you take us home?
Okay. First of all, I want to thank David and Amy for doing such a spectacular job in managing this. I have to say, and I know I speak for I think everyone, that what a blessing it is to have things like Zoom video, to be able to not only talk to people, but to see them, learn about their homes and their choice of wallpaper. It's really, and just to be invited into your home and you can be invited into mine, that makes it very special. This is a challenging year, and yet ritual grounds us. And at a time when we feel like when we feel that the world is turning upside down, there's a tradition that we follow. There's a God that we believe in. And there is a community that we can depend on, that we are part of, and that we can bring our children up with hope in a better tomorrow, and that spring will yet come. I'll remind you, and I'll just close with this. One of the things that I love in our tradition is looking at the moon when we are during the course of the month and marking our calendar by the moon. And the fact is that when we gather on Pesach, there'll be a full moon. And it's a reminder that that full moon will be realized. It will be realized with God's help, but it's going to be realized as we come together as a community. In every age, the Jewish people have told the story no matter their circumstances. And the Haggadah reflects those different changes. We will tell the story again, and we will remember this particular Pesach more than most. But God willing, we will go forward as a people. And whether or not it's next year in Jerusalem, next year may we be stronger and better and healthier. Amen. Good night, everybody.
Yashikoach.
Chag
Thanks
Sameach.
everyone for coming. Lila Tov.
You can unmute people now.
Good night. Yeah, we can all unmute and say goodbye.
Thank you, guys.
You
It
all.
was great.
Everybody.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. It's good to see you.
Thank you
Thank
so
you,
much.
everyone. Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you. Good night.
Looking
So-
forward to seeing some of
Dave,
you
I'm going to stop
tomorrow.
recording now, okay?
Do the Pesach. Three of
A lot of people going off.
you. Come on.
Stick around and hang out.
Chazan was just saying, feel free to join tomorrow night for songs with him and Chazan Berkey and Naomi Weiss. It'll be a really nice night. See you all soon tomorrow. Take care.
You got it.
All right.